مردم شریف ایران، من شهریار افشار هستم، میزبان شما در Politics 365. امروز خانم روز پرس ریکتر از ایمپکت ایران به برنامه پیوسته. ایشون یه اکتیویست هستن که مدتها در این زمینه فعالیت کردن، حقوق بشر، و این گروه ایمپکت ایران هم چندین سال فعالیت میکنه و با حمایت چندین گروه مختلف تا حالا فعالیتش رو ادامه میده. بقیه برنامه به انگلیسیه، ما رو ببخشید از اون لحاظ. Rose, welcome to Politics 365. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all you're doing. So glad that we finally had some time to connect. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up? What is your career, like background and trajectory? And then how did you end up in this particular role?
Well, thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here. How did I end up in this role? I began my work in international diplomacy. I was a diplomat for the Maldivian government, and I worked under a pretty dynamic foreign minister, Ahmed Shahid, at the time. And in 2011, following protests in Iran in 2009 after Ahmadinejad's election, the UN established a special rapporteur, which is basically a UN monitor to focus on what's going on in the country and report to the UN on developments as it relates to human rights. And so once that was established, the foreign minister of Maldives became that special rapporteur. He was appointed to hold the position for 6 years. And the first thing he did was set up a team that he thought would help him document the violations and abuses that people were reporting on a pretty systematic basis. I headed that team. And in that time, I got to know, not just the situation on the ground, but the community of actors that have been working, way before the UN got really engaged on the country situation to promote respect for human rights in the country. And when the mandate was completed, and having supported the Special Rapporteur's efforts to document and report on the situation, I, wanted to stay in the work. I thought that the work was incredibly constructive and effective. And I wanted to continue working with the human rights defenders that I gotten to really know and become really not just professionally committed to, but also on a personal level.
Right. Kind of fell in love with it. It's hard not to fall in love with Iran. I'm not going to fault you for that. So that's great. There's so many freedom lovers and promoters around the world. They imagine a better Iran that can take its rightful place in a civilized society with respect to human rights and all those things, and democracy. To the extent we can cultivate a democracy that can take root in that country, however which way the people of Iran want it. So how do you go about your mission now? I mean, since, like you say, the official work was done, I mean, how is Impact Iran funded? I see a lot of organizations behind you there. Are these partners? Are they strategic alliances? Collaborate? What is the group?
Yeah, so the UN, the UN Special Rapporteur's mandate didn't just happen on its own. Iranians, human rights defenders, advocated for it to get set up. And so during the time that I was working on that mechanism, a lot of organizations were working year after year to push the UN to renew the work of the Special Rapporteur. He or she only has 1 year to carry out their work or report. And every year the UN decides whether or not they want to renew that the work or not for another year. And so what these organizations decided to do back in 2014 was to form a coalition where they could advocate at the UN for the international community, not just to continue to talk about what's going on in Iran, but to act on recommendations and to act on advice and pushes from Iranian human rights defenders for more accountability. And so this coalition, it's 19 organizations, you can see their logos behind me, who have decided to throw together their resources and their expertise and to advocate for these mechanisms to exist, to support them, and to engage not just with that special rapporteur that I talked about, but to engage with a wide set of accountability mechanisms that the UN has in place for trying to address human rights abuses and to advance justice.
So how, look, you more than anyone is familiar with the criticism that the UN receives for not being as effective as I think people would like it to be. I think maybe some people look at the UN as the world army or something, and you just push a button and the UN flies into one, disenfranchised community in somewhere and makes peace. And that's just not how the UN works. So how do you, I mean, what does success, like I said, look like for you or the UN really in dealing with human rights? Because it seems like from the outside, to the ignorant eyes of someone not familiar with the bureaucracy of the UN and the legal international law and all those issues, that it's not as effective as the people of Iran outside would like it to be. Is that fair? Am I being unfair? I don't want to be unfair.
Of course, yes, and like advancing democracy and setting up a situation where everybody is equal and respected is a long task. It's a long path, and the UN is but one institution in a range of global order in order to try to promote that work. And is it not that effective? It's what we have. And arguably speaking, there are a lot of elements to the system that, are replacements for domestic mechanisms that don't exist. In Iran in particular, there are no accountability mechanisms. There is no place for Iranians to go and complain that their rights have been violated. There is no a mechanism where Iranians can elect officials that will pass legislation that address their economic needs, their social needs, their cultural rights. And so, the international bodies at the UN help to sort of supplement some of that, to help, supplement that absence. And one success recently, after the Masa Amini protests broke out, was the establishment of the UN fact-finding mission. Now, the coalition Impact Iran, those 19 organizations that I talked about, work with other international organizations to push the UN to establish this fact-finding mission. That fact-finding mission will end up gathering evidence and building a list of perpetrators who have been reportedly behind carrying out some of the abuses we saw on our TV screens in 2002. And where does this get us? Well, since there are no courts in Iran for perpetrators to be prosecuted, these representatives, these people who are carrying out this investigation, can build cases that can then be prosecuted in courts outside of Iran under the principle of universal jurisdiction. And those people who are prosecuted can be held accountable should they leave their the country, should they travel, should they go, assets can be frozen, so on and so forth. There have been, a number of cases where the international community has prosecuted somebody for a crime, regardless of where that crime took place. This is the only path available to, Iranians at this present time. And so success is, for at least the coalition at this present time, is a break in the cycle of impunity that continues to feed the violations that we see year after year unfolding on our TV screen, and as we watch the country situation deteriorate.
It's as you mentioned, I think the International Criminal Court. I don't know if that's the one you were referring to. I just with what's going on in Gaza, I just saw Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu complaining about the fact that with the South Africa and other countries are trying to take Israel to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity and war crimes. It's just ironic that here we are talking about Iran, but here's Israel. Do you feel, I mean, are there active cases at the International Criminal Court right now regarding Iran, or is it dormant? Is there anything happening right now on Iran?
So there are three pools of three paths here that we're talking about in terms of courts. There is the International Criminal Court, which Iran cannot be prosecuted in because they're not a party to something called the Rome Statute, and so they can't be prosecuted in that court. The ICJ is the International Criminal Court of Justice. That's where war crimes, as you just mentioned, are prosecuted. Everyone can be prosecuted in that court, including Iran. And so that is possible, but it has not, there are no cases on the docket. Iran has not been prosecuted in that court before. There are cases where courts in another country, in say Sweden, for example, have prosecuted a case that took place in a crime that took place in Iran in their courts. An individual, Mr. Nouri, is an example of somebody who was prosecuted for such a crime, and is being held and detained in Sweden for human rights crimes. And so that is an example in terms of somebody being prosecuted under what's called the principle of universal jurisdiction. So there are these three paths. The two that are available to Iranians are the ICJ and the universal jurisdiction. That fact-finding mission is the path towards the former.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that so much. It's such a confusing array of who's who national. It's to the uninitiated watching all of this. It's hard to understand who's going where. Especially, I mean, right now, obviously, Iran is being prosecuted in the court of public opinion among the Iranian diaspora, and you see all the social media, and they show all, this person, too much arrested, or sentenced to death. All these individual cases, they make it very personal. But when they post social media, they don't have abstract condemnation. They focus on this person's arrested, this person's in danger of being killed or executed. Do you feel that individual activism has any effect on Iran? Has anyone been saved? I hope it has. I don't know.
So, platforming voices of Iranians, victims, their families, and those that are concerned about human rights in the country, does have an impact. Firstly, it turns the heads of an attention and galvanizes the attention of the international community. That platform, that stage, is the stage that Iran seeks to have access to. It seeks credibility on that stage. It seeks legitimacy. And that it does because from time to time it reaches out. It needs that platform to carry out its interests, and it has invested in counteracting the pushes from human rights defenders. That demonstrates that it cares. It has been investing a lot of capital in its own counter narrative, in fighting back at the UN for these mechanisms to be established, in fact, there have been a number of cases where Iran has responded to international criticism in a real way. We've seen the number of executions drop over the years. Now they have been creeping up in recent years, but between 2015 and 2019, executions dropped to an all-time low. In fact, I think it was something like 70% of executions had ceased because international criticism have been focused on Iran's use of capital punishment against drug offenders. It reformed its laws in response to that criticism and, domestic activism, as well as the activism from the Iranian diaspora. And, that did save, I would estimate, hundreds of lives. There is absolutely more work to be done, but therein lies, a really concrete example of how these individual efforts and their efforts collectively do really advance some kind of change and do create a pathway for more hope.
In the couple of minutes we have left, what does the future look like? Would you look, some people may want to bring back the Iran deal. I don't know if you supported it or were against it back then, but obviously the Iran deal didn't include anything about human rights. It was nuclear based. And so a lot of people were against the Iran deal based on that. And they were against any kind of negotiation with the regime. But you're a former diplomat. You know how diplomacy works. How do you affect change apart from accountability and criminal courts? Was this coalition support engaging Iran or continuing to isolate Iran?
I think that most of the people in this coalition, these organizations, are in support of any path that does two things: realizes the kind of processes that will allow for them to establish protections for their human rights and to allow for those protections to actually work, to be exercised, and in an equal way. Whatever that path is, whatever that government is, whatever the reform process is, I think human rights defenders will get behind that, especially if the result, of course, that the approach that is taken is a human rights-based approach, and that the result is the realization of human rights in the country.
So from a human rights perspective, what I'm hearing is your coalition is politically agnostic. We don't really care how it gets done, as long as human rights are protected, whether it's with this regime or another one, you don't really care. You're not trying to push democracy or a particular political agenda. You're simply trying to advance human rights, accountability, at least in Iran.
Yes, that's correct. Look, I think we can all be grown-ups and acknowledge that some models work better than others to promote the human rights, and therefore, coincidentally, there is an alignment between, say, democracies and the ability for its citizens of various nation states to promote their interests, their human rights interests, which aren't just the right to vote or the right to follow whatever religion you want. They include all of the foundations for having a future, right? One that you can where everyone can have an education and create an economic future that's helps everyone, and it allows us to support our families. So I think that's the thrust of it. Unfortunately, the models that we know work are only ones that adhere to democratic principles. But whatever that model looks like, whatever can be devised, I think human rights defenders would get behind whatever allows for them to realize a future for all Iranians.
Thank you so much, Rose Parris Richter. We've learned so much from Impact Iran, and I would say you're doing God's work. You're doing something that's really important to the Iranian people, just a right to live, just a right to, like you say, pursue happiness and whatever political environment they want to choose, that's up to them. But their simple right to freedom and safety, and to pursue their lives in peace. That's a beautiful mission. I wish you great success, and I hope you'll come back to see us soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.